Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, October the 22nd. Britain's top civil servant will be shown the door in under a year, the Times reports this morning. Today we ask, will even Morgan McSweeney survive it long term in number 10? I'll explain why I have my doubts. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy of Politico. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that gives you everything you need to understand the day ahead at Westminster in 20 minutes. The Times is reporting that Cabinet Secretary Chris Wormald could be replaced by Louise Casey, Baroness Casey of Blackstock. So we ask, does the Prime Minister have a people problem?
Sue Gray, Matthew Doyle, Steph Driver, Paul Ovenden, James Lyons, Simon Case, Dolyeta Mitfari, Claire Reynolds, Munira Lula, Caris Roberts, Matt Clifford, Tom Webb, Nick Williams. That is just a list of the people who have gone from just number 10 in just the 15 months Keir Starmer has been in power. It's quite something. Were they all to blame? Were they all the problem, Anne? Or could it be something closer to home?
Well, perish the thought. But the Prime Minister has a busy day ahead, as well as PMQs. There's a big summit on the Western Balkans. Leaders of the six nations from that region meeting British and European officials for talks on migration, security and growth in a region, of course, where Russia is seeking to wield influence. And Keir Starmer is hoping to make progress too on small boats. We're on the verge of exceeding the entire number of channel crossings in 2024. That's a statistic, of course, that worries number 10 a lot.
Meanwhile, there's fresh speculation on what could fill Rachel Reeves' black hole in the budget. Taxing people who use limited liability partnerships is this morning's idea. So that's lawyers, family doctors and accountants who use this structure. Essentially, people who use this are allowed to deem themselves as self-employed and therefore not pay employers' national insurance. This all could raise £2 billion of the £30 billion black hole, says the Times. But I do wonder, Anne, will taxing family doctors really still seem a good idea in a month's time once the almost certain opposition to that has got up and running?
For sure, although family doctors may say that they will get some sort of a carve out. But then if you do that, Sam, what's the point of this entire policy? So let's keep a watching brief on that one. Meanwhile, the new Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has been trying to quell a growing row over the grooming gangs inquiry. She's been insisting the remit won't be widened, the inquiry won't be watered down, and it will stick only to grooming gangs and not to other types of sexual abuse. Will this work? We'll have more on this in a moment.
But let's get on with our top story. And just before we do anything else, let's get the denial out of the way first. Number 10 insists that the Prime Minister has full confidence in the Cabinet Secretary, Chris Wormald. So there you go. But I have to say, Anne, I do think that listeners of this podcast might have just a tiny inkling that that's not the full story. The Guardian over the summer kicked off the Wormald to go stories, and we told you a few weeks back that some in government thought that Wormald might be out the door as a result of the COVID inquiry. He's in the firing line because he was the permanent secretary at the Department for Health who didn't have a plan when the pandemic hit.
The briefing in the Times is quite brutal, however. It's quoting a senior number 10 insider saying Chris is a parody of every civil servant stereotype. He's given clear instructions on an issue. He says he'll be able to deliver it, but only after we've commissioned a wide-ranging review that reports sometime in the mid-2080s.
Ouch. I mean, anonymous personal briefings like this are painful to read, but they are delivered and they are a sign of dysfunction. So I'm sure he would deny every element of that, but that is in line with other things you hear. But Anne, I understand that you have some very specific intelligence, little scoop in this area, about one of the first big run-ins that Chris Wormald had that weakened his power base.
Well, one of the standoffs, Sam, that has led, I think, to this wider briefing against Wormald is that he strongly opposed the appointment of Samantha Jones, Sam Jones, as permanent secretary at the Department of Health. Now, you remember she was the former Great Ormond Street nurse, very dynamic figure, brought into Boris Johnson's rather chaotic number 10 as operating officer and expert advisor specifically around health. She also has strong private sector experience. She does have fans. Alan Milburn, the former health secretary and the lead non-exec at the department, likes her style. He supported her appointment as permanent secretary. Presumably, Wes Streeting was also keen on that, but Chris Wormald was not. He didn't think it was the right appointment to see through the plan for change. There was a ferocious battle about that. Chris Wormald said very directly that he opposed it, but nonetheless, she got the job. The problem with that is this all happened about, I think it was April, that it finally went over the line. But that tension has been simmering over aspects of policy and over Chris Wormald's leadership. So this whole narrative that he was a safe pair of hands just hasn't worked out, because the safe pair of hands has, as you pointed out, become a kind of negative cause célèbre in his own right. And how long can this continue?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Um, Clearly, this all comes back to a question of Keir Starmer's judgment, right? He appointed him, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But there's another point I want to land with you, Anne, which is that the idea that actually Chris Wormald is not popular amongst Mandarins as well as the political classes. He's not popular amongst quite a lot of other civil servants. And it's not just because of question marks over the recent round of permanent secretary appointments that he had his hand in some really strange appointments that I'm sure may end up being talking points in the future. But eagle-eared listeners may remember a few weeks back I told you about something called Operation Pegasus. So that was a pretend crisis exercise in Whitehall to wargame another pandemic. And how we laughed about Whitehall cosplaying a crisis at the time when we told you about this in the start of September. Anyway, I understand, somebody told me last night, lots of officials were very concerned about Chris Wormald's performance in Operation Pegasus. I was told last night that he was just indecisive and made everything worse and had clearly not learned the lessons from COVID. And I think that dynamic is amongst the biggest problems that he faces.
Yikes. I think I should say maybe one word in defense, or a couple of words in defense of the cabinet secretary. After all, he was appointed, and you have just mentioned it there, Sam. It is Keir Starmer who makes these appointments. These are very personal choices, and they took him over competitors like Antonio Romeo, who was seen as more dynamic, ambitious for that top role and to lead the whole of the civil service. I mean, she's at the Home Office, so she's not exactly underemployed these days. But it does strike me that people are dumping on Chris Wormald for being the kind of character that Keir Starmer said he wanted, something a bit more low-key, methodical, whatever you think of his performance, very experienced in the COVID era. So I think there is a tendency there to brief against people, prepare to throw them under the bus for some of the same reasons that they were appointed in the first place. And this may be one of the deeper problems in number 10. And slightly related to that, I think you've been hearing more on what's happening around Morgan McSweeney, also a familiar character to listeners of this podcast, and how he's faring in the ups and downs of all those internal civil wars around Keir.
I have. And I just want to say amen to what you just said, Anne.
I'll take that, Sam. I like an amen.
The number of times Keir Starmer's thrown somebody under a bus since getting into power. I mean, we're running short of buses, let's be honest. I think there's a pattern there. But my questions around Morgan McSweeney are not because I'm hearing people say that he's going to go. I think there is something much, much bigger going on in government that I just want to point a light at, that it's sitting in plain sight, and I just want to pull it all together. There has been a 180-degree total reversal in the way Number 10 does its communication strategy just since September. Now, we've talked about little bits of it on this podcast, but I think we need to just stop, pause, and appreciate they are doing things completely differently all of a sudden. And the Morgan McSweeney playbook, I think, has gone out of the window. Let me explain what I'm talking about. Right. Since Keir Starmer pretty much came to power, the job of getting Labour re-elected was done by targeting a very specific type of voter, as it's called. They were called hero voters. They were Brexit-leaning former Labour voters who drifted off and backed the Tories in 2019. And the messaging of Keir Starmer's Labour Party all the way up to the election and then all the way up to the summer was aimed at that coalition. And there were often complaints from the left of the Labour Party, including the soft left, that it was a bit brutal. And this strategy amped up in the first 6 months of this year. And what that leads to are things like quite eye-watering pronouncements about migration, such as the Islander Strangers speech. It means that you make clear that the cost of living Trump's green policies. We heard a lot of that in the first 6 months. And you would never, ever, ever hear Brexit blamed for blame for any problems, because Brexit voters are Labour voters, or at least they were in 2019, 2024. But since September, this strategy, which was masterminded by Morgan McSweeney, his ex-aide Paul Ovenden, and Deborah Mattinson before the election. Now, it had its detractors and it had critics who said, look, all of this eye-watering language to sort of try and stem the bleeding to reform just cost us votes to the Greens, the Lib Dems, the Independents. But it was nevertheless in place up until the summer. But it's all gone. The conference speech, that was the first sign of a 180-degree reversal. And now Keir Starmer was messaging to reunite the soft left and get back those voters drifting off to the left. Now they're blaming Brexit for the black hole. And now there's talking government of re-greening this government. It has just flipped completely and flipped away from the McSweeney playbook.
And the interesting thing for me there, listening to you, Sam, is how Tim Allen, as that powerful new communications chief, is handling not only a tense situation around the personnel that we've just laid out, and particularly about Morgan McSweeney, but that Allen is himself impeccably new Labour, very right-leaning in Labour terms, extremely pro-business, very successful himself in business and the corporate world, Blairite through and through. So you wouldn't say, oh, he's come in and he's just decided he'd like to go back to the old religion for personal reasons. He seems to have parked that side of his political persona to try and work through a strategy to reunite some of the flanks of this government of number 10, and therefore of the Labour benches as well, have become antagonistic to each other about what it means to be part of the Keir Starmer project in power. But I still am not sure where that leaves the machinery and if you like, the person who is there to glue that machinery onto the project and onto delivery, and that is one Morgan McSweeney. So are you seeing a leaving party scenario there or not?
Friends of Morgan say there's no sign of him going. People who I know have talked to Morgan recently say he's relaxed and comfortable with the apparent change in direction. I'm not hearing him go immediately, but it's just such a bigger move away from his strategy. And you're right to identify who's responsible. Tim Allen, the new strategic communications chief. And I'm told that he came in basically with this plan and he's calling the shots on it. And it's also got shades of Tim Allen's great friend Tom Baldwin, who was Ed Miliband's old director of communications in this. You know, if you listen to Tom Baldwin talk on Sky or anywhere else before the summer, you know, the plan being executed now was the plan that Tom, who's very close to Tim, was calling for. And there's a touch of the West Wing, let Bartlett be Bartlett about it. Let's let Keir Starmer be his true sort of soft left self. But it's such a big battle for the soul of number 10 and the Labour Party. You know, the Allen camp, as you say, would say that they're reuniting the left, which has splintered away from Labour since the election. But the authors of the original plan still think it's really, really dangerous. You know, Labour will always attract the left. It's Middle England that switches away at election time. And that's the danger of Labour just going back into its comfort zone. And there's no doubt of the cheering at some who already support and back Labour, the cheering the change of direction. One said of this new change of direction, it's Ed Miliband 2015 all over again. And of course, in 2015, Ed Miliband, then leader of the Labour Party, failed to take Middle England and led the party to a historic defeat. I told you a month ago that Keir tried to demote Morgan and then backtracked. I still feel that is a massive and underappreciated fact in Westminster. It's not an easy relationship. And now it looks to me as if Tim Allen is in the driving seat of the stuff I always thought that Morgan McSweeney did. So is Morgan McSweeney still empowered and as all-powerful as he once was? Doesn't seem like so to me. So have I got anybody telling me he's going? Absolutely not, and they would deny it. This is deduction and political logic. But given the massive scale of this strategic U-turn that people don't really appreciate as such, it is massive. I've got just a question mark whether Morgan makes it all the way through to the next election.
It's making the Borgias look tame, or all of that briefing and counter briefing in number 10. The big topic as we head into PMQs is grooming gangs and the fraught state of the government's inquiry into that. My Playbook colleague Dan Bloom this morning suggesting Kemi Badenoch may go hard on the very messy unspooling of this. And a fourth abuse survivor indeed quit the panel last night. Now, this is very difficult territory, as we know, for Labour. The worries there that the whole inquiry could be widened and therefore diluted. The Home Office is firmly denying that. The obvious question is why survivors have lost faith in this thing, and will more quit, and who is intended to lead it, and what will the background of that person be. And all of this has the potential to create a much more fragile environment around this inquiry. So Shabana Mahmood has leaned into the story. She has been writing op-eds for the Times and for GB News, saying it will explicitly examine the ethnicity and the religion of the offenders. We need to acknowledge who they were. She says it will not be watered down, and its scope will not change on my watch. One thing I always think when I read those very punchy comments in the Mahmood style is, we've come a long way from the rather sugar tongues approach to this inquiry under her predecessor, Yvette Cooper. We're pointing out changes of direction in number 10, changes of direction and tone around the grooming gangs inquiry as well, Sam, but it still doesn't seem to be settling into a narrative that the government can be very happy about.
Shabana Mahmood has got lots of plaudits for the way she's conducted herself as Home Secretary in the opening weeks. Officials think that she is decisive. She ticked off many of the difficult decisions that Yvette Cooper had left behind for her. But the bottom line is, this is a very, very difficult one to keep all the different people on board that you need. So I'm afraid you can't really judge her performance until we get a name. Shabana, we need a name.
Well, I'm being told to contact the podcast immediately as soon as the appointment is made. Another event in the Commons today everybody will be looking out for is Angela Rayner's resignation speech, her first public appearance since she left over that tax issue last month, and she will speak in the Commons. I think we're being told not to expect anything dramatic. It's not going to be a sort of Robin Cook kind of tear down as she goes out of the door for now. But it'll definitely be a moment for hankies on the Labour side, won't it, Sam? They do miss Ange.
They do. I'm always quite struck that top of the list is Wes Streeting, who's clearly had quite a strong personal affection for her. It was barely a year ago that those two were sparring in the Spectator Parliamentarian of the Year dinner in what we all spied was rivals for the leadership. The world has completely changed now, and I think she won't present herself as a martyr, but others see herself as having been martyred, and there is a lot of affection around for somebody who once was seen as the future. Now we better wrap this up, otherwise we will be the future once, Anne, because we've gone past our 20-minute limit. So that just leaves it from me to say thank you very much indeed, and we will be back in the morning.
We will indeed. See you then.